Chapter 12, Virtual Reality. The Consciologist sees the world peopled by human beings with two distinctly different points of view. The searcher after authority looks outside of oneself and finds introspection to be a decidedly second-rate view of life. The searcher after what is looks inside of oneself and finds extroversion to be the second-rate view of life. Each is watching basically the same show, but their descriptions of it differ radically. What the difference amounts to is whether one places more emphasis on the external event or one's internal reaction to it. Each searches for a reality in which all will be understood. The searcher after authority has determined that somewhere in this world it is possible to discover the authority that will reveal to one this reality and complete understanding. The searcher after what is has determined that no such external authority is possible and that the understanding must be discovered within oneself. Each reacts differently to similar experiences of living. The searcher after authority reacts to every external event. Those events constitute reality. The searcher after what is knows that external events do not constitute reality. Reality is revealed by how the searcher after what is reacts to the external events. At this point in one's development of an expansion of one's awareness of consciousness, one finds oneself a searcher after what is in a physical world peopled primarily by searchers after authority. Does one's minority position leave one vulnerable? Yes, in many ways it does. In a show of hands, you probably lose. But hands are part of this physical world, this virtual reality. All is consciousness. We will be better served to compete not in terms of physical hands, but in terms of mental how-to abilities. The how in education is represented by the field of economics. And Consciology positions ethics as part of economics. This is because economics is based on contracts, and contracts are based on ethical behavior. The trading of goods or services that bring benefits to each party to the contract. Regardless of the intentions of the parties to the contract, all parties do not agree to the contract unless each anticipates that the contract will increase one's well-being. That is how the economics of free trade gets things done that increase the well-being of all. The power of the Consciologist lies not in a show of hands, but in a show of handshakes, signifying agreements and contracts. The knowledge of how to get things done is actually an act of creation. The more one functions as a conduit for the power of Consciology, the more one becomes the creator of one's future. The searcher after authority reacts to events in the world. The searcher after what is creates events in the world. Do not misunderstand this act of creation. It possibly creates an actual event that happens in this physical world, but that is not normally to what this act of creation refers. The creating exists primarily in the mind of the individual. By purposely refraining from reacting to an event in the physical world, the very existence of the event comes into question. To that individual, the event has spawned no reaction. To that individual, at least, it is as if the event did not occur. No reaction resulted. To that individual, at least, events that heretofore seemingly controlled one's reactions to them are rendered powerless. To that extent, the individual has created a self-directed life. At the very least, the individual has created another choice of action that did not formerly exist. This is a beginning at creating a life independent of the events of the physical world. The former reality dissolves into a virtual reality, the raw material for creating a world that contributes to the benefit of all. Again, human beings do not experience absolute freedom. Human beings experience freedom to choose between available choices. The searcher after authority chooses to view oneself as powerless without the control of the authority. The searcher after what is chooses to view oneself as potentially all-powerful and in control. The searcher after what is has come to understand that it is not possible for anything to control one's actions other than oneself. That being understood, external events, while still the stuff of one's physical world, no longer determine the reaction of the individual. The human being is not free from the reality of the events of this physical world, but the human being is free to choose how the individual will react to those events. This does create additional freedom previously unavailable to this individual. About 3 millennia ago, human beings chose self-consciousness over animal instinct. The human being began to take a conscious part in expanding one's awareness of consciousness. Now the human being stands on the threshold of increasing one's participation in this ever-expanding awareness of consciousness. The human being begins to consciously participate in the creation process. This will occur increasingly in the physical world of medicine. The results will be spectacular to observe. but that is not the greatest spectacle. The greatest spectacle is to experience the process. The greatest spectacle is to be a part of the spectacle. Searchers after authority are spectators. If it appears that the authority has discovered utopia, then the searcher after authority will want to share in the plunder. And the authority is expected to welcome this hanger-on to share in the bounty. Does this scenario resemble a fairy tale? But we forget. Everything will be different in utopia. Human beings will no longer think as human beings think. I think not. Ends do not justify means. The means become the ends. The ends contain nothing that was not present in the embryo of the means. The lotus blossom, in all its increased beauty, contains nothing that was not embryonically present within the bud. The searcher after what is a participant who risks all to become the consciologist that expands one's awareness of consciousness. The searcher after what is does not admire the authority from afar. The searcher after what is becomes the authority to oneself. The searcher after what is and the personal authority tend to merge. This is not the impossible dream of an external authority. This is the personal authority, having authority over no one but oneself. Everything is consciousness. Through this process of recognition of one's basic unity with all, one's freedom develops into an unbelievable expansion of one's awareness of consciousness. But cosmically, all remains as before. We continue to be human beings, limited, incomplete, and imperfect. Expanding one's awareness of consciousness increases one's command of the physical world. The rewards of greater knowledge increase one's well-being. But we are observing expansions in Earth years whose essence is measured in light years. It is personally rewarding to be progressing in the correct direction toward reaching the goal. But it is unreasonable to think of reaching that destination. It is like the bumper sticker that reveals success is a journey, not a destination. One sets goals that are possible, and on reaching one goal, a new one is set. Each is a landmark along one's expansion of awareness of consciousness. But destination? No. A destination is another absolute term that is beyond a human being's present comprehension. As human beings, we search. Enjoy the journey. Enjoy the virtual reality tour of discovery. No, this does not refer to a computer simulation of reality. This refers to the game of life in which each of us is a daily participant. We have examined how human beings are limited, incomplete, and imperfect, and that human beings do not experience absolutes. One of those out-of-reach absolutes that human beings do not experience is this thing we call reality. We experience the physical world with our five senses, and that becomes our reality. It is the stuff with which all of our discoveries are involved. It is our learning laboratory and our building blocks. The natural sciences classify it. History orders it in time. Geography records its position in space. Without this physical world, we appear to have nothing. Yet Consciology declares that all is consciousness. The other pillars of learning seem to give some support to this view. Philosophy concerns the establishment of goals that originate in the mind and consciousness. Psychology concerns individual variations of the mind and consciousness. Economics concerns the actions of human beings as based upon their mental makeup and consciousness. It is not difficult to identify philosophy, psychology, and economics with consciousness, but not the natural sciences, historical facts, and geography. These appear to comprise a reality outside of ourselves, a reality outside of consciousness, a reality independent of our mental capacities, a reality characterized as the physical world, a reality over which we seem to have little control, a reality that seems to function independently of human wills, a reality that appears quite frequently not only to act with disregard to human well-being, but often appears to be operating at purposes opposed to human well-being. Though there are growing instances where the natural sciences are being tamed to act as human beings direct, the bias is unmistakably anti-humanity. The ancients viewed these natural sciences of today as the forces of nature. They sought to appease them by worshiping them, but the forces were not appeased. They seemed to represent a counter-reality that functioned without regard or deference to humanity. Some identified this area not as an area worthy of praise, but of contempt. They sought to characterize its actions as the work of devils and demons. Still no response. This outside reality behaved as it did, regardless of how humans chose to respond to it. Finally, it became well enough understood that intellectually and emotionally, most were able to regard it somewhat stoically and to recognize that actions of the natural sciences operate according to predetermined scientific formula and independently of humanity. Humanity would be well advised to understand what could be understood and try as best it could to avoid the tantrums of natural science. Volcanic eruptions, extreme temperatures, floods and droughts, avalanches, lightning bolts, tornadoes, hurricanes, plagues, and poisons. These are outside the scope of human action, an outside reality that functions oftentimes counter to the well-being of humanity. Yet, it includes the sun and the rain that nourish the plants that make the survival of humanity possible. This natural milieu of a physical world functioning according to natural sciences appears to be a mixed blessing that seems to function entirely independently of the likes of we humans. It does as it pleases, and it is up to the human beings to stay out of its way as best they can, or else. This, we are told, is reality. Learn to live with it. Well, consciologists have not learned to live with it. Not entirely. Yes, they recognize that human beings are limited, imperfect, and incomplete. Yes, they recognize that there is a real world out there that impacts whatever they try to do. Yes, they recognize that human beings do not experience absolute freedom, but are only free to choose from choices available to we humans. Yes, they even realize that no absolutes are presently within our reach. No absolute truth, no absolute beauty. But the consciologist also recognizes that all is consciousness. Philosophy and psychology concern consciousness. Even economics concerns consciousness involved in human action. But what about the natural sciences, history, and geography? These are sciences involved with the real world, in quotes. The physical world represents an outside reality that does not appear to be related to consciousness. Philosophies for centuries have divided along this line as to what is real and what is not. How different groups decided the issue can even be shown geographically. It is the issue that separates Eastern and Western philosophies. Western philosophies tended to identify the physical world as real and what they called the spiritual world as at least less real. Eastern philosophies tended to identify the physical world as unreal and what they called the spiritual world as the real world. This philosophical schism required the addition of the third category of spiritual to define these positions. The fact that there exist only the two categories of mental and physical did not discourage them from dissecting the mental aspect into a mental and spiritual category. Each recognized that consciousness included areas that appeared foreign to the natural sciences, and those were thrust into this spiritual category. In Chapter 4 of this effort, we have tried to salvage those components of the spiritual category that represent genuine components of consciousness, and to discard the rest. Hinduism goes so far as to identify the spiritual world as the real world and the physical world as illusion. Of course, in America, the physical world is the real world and the mental world is less real and the spiritual world is still less real. Then Consciology proclaims that there are but the two worlds of the physical and the mental, and that the mental includes quite a bit of what is commonly misunderstood as spiritual. Further, both the physical world and the mental world are real, as each is a part of consciousness. But again, real and reality are absolute terms of which human beings can have no understanding. In absolute terms, it is the mental world of consciousness that is eternal, and the physical world is a temporary learning laboratory. But do not panic. The physical world is temporary in light years talk, not in earth years talk. Temporary in the sense of eternity is not the same as temporary as we human beings experience it. For we human beings do not experience absolutes like eternity, so ultimate conclusions are somewhat fanciful. If the physical world is a temporary learning laboratory, it is our learning laboratory, and it will continue long after our personal utilization of it has ceased. There is an unknown something out there. The total of all of our knowledge is that it occupies space. It has mass. It reflects light. To what is this referring? Other planets? Other galaxies? Black holes? Quasars? No, this description applies to something on Earth, something in this physical world in which we live. In fact, that description applies to our total knowledge about everything in this physical world, our entire environment. But one might object that much more is known about many things, but that would be inaccurate. What is known is how human beings perceive the environment. We know nothing that would confirm that how human beings perceive things is actually related to how things are. As we apparently never tire of repeating, human beings do not perceive absolutes such as reality, ultimate truth, and total freedom. They simply are not in the scope of the comprehension of current human beings. This is not to say that this limitation will always exist. This is to say that absolutes are not a part of the perception of consciousness that human beings presently experience. The point is that if we are to presume to speak in terms of ultimate truths, and Consciology does, the mental world of consciousness is eternal, while the physical world is not eternal as such. And that too is false, because the physical world too is a part of consciousness that is eternal. So we have again demonstrated the inadequacy of human terms applied to absolutes. Probably the best analogy would be to think of the physical world not as reality, but as virtual reality. Though it may not represent ultimate reality, to we human beings, it appears to be real and provides us with our primary examples of what reality is like. We know what we see, and simultaneously we know that what we see is not what is there. The eyes focus reflections from something out there. Light reflects off of something out there, and depending on how the light is reflected, the eye sees colors and shapes. But these are no more representative of what is truly out there than is the image on the television screen that focuses similar reflections upon a glass surface, or the image on the beaded projection screen in the motion picture theater. The other senses tell us more about what is out there, but in similar fashion, each represents our perception of something we sense is there. But our perception tells us only how our senses function. It tells us nothing of the characteristics of what is really out there. Our perception is not of reality, but of our virtual reality. But this inadequacy of ours should not disturb us. Thinking of the physical world in terms of virtual reality is useful to put things in proper perspective. Otherwise, human beings are prone to overreact to events in the physical world. Events in the physical world may be interpreted as going badly from the point of view of the individual. Viewing it as reality instead of a virtual reality adventure leaves one too depressed to objectively evaluate it. Events in the physical world may be interpreted as going great from the point of view of the individual. Viewing it as reality instead of a virtual reality adventure leaves one too elated to objectively evaluate it. Remember that objectivity is not others viewing you as an object, but you viewing you as an object. This is more easily achieved when the physical world is perceived as virtual reality. One's predicaments are less emotionally involving in the virtual reality setting, and one is more likely to be able to reach unbiased and objective conclusions. Viewing the physical world as a virtual reality adventure levels out the extremes of depressing emotions and elevated emotions that are both a part of the ride. If one is able to keep centered between the emotional extremes, the adventure is less likely to dislodge one's position as impartial judge. The result is more likely to be one's maximum benefit and satisfaction, and to expand one's awareness of consciousness. To paraphrase, it's not whether you win or lose, but how you play the game. It's not whether your emotions are high or low, but how much you expand your awareness of consciousness. To take the viewpoint of the physical world as virtual reality, one must simultaneously juggle two apparently opposing positions. This is the irony that is central to any revelation of fact. The irony of the Golden Rule is that it instructs one to treat others as oneself, when it seems obvious that others are not oneself. When viewing the physical world as virtual reality, the other human beings must simultaneously be viewed as objects and subjects. Human objects in your virtual reality adventure are also subjects in virtual reality adventures of their own. And you are an object in their virtual reality adventures. The extent to which one is able to master participation in these twin dramas can be measured by the respect that one holds for other human beings. This respect is developed through understanding one's experiences with particular human beings. But it is not enough that one develops respect for the particular human beings with which one has contact in the physical world virtual reality adventure. At some point, one's knowledge must bring one to an understanding that given similar circumstances, all human beings will react in the same way that has fostered respect for these particular human beings. That is a gigantic step to take. Because while developing respect for the individual one knows well, one has some knowledge of others for which one has no respect and can see no way that these individuals could ever be seen as respectable. Take the divisions of humanity according to Consciology. It is not difficult to respect the searcher after what is, but what about the searcher after authority? This individual may be slave to various addictions that lead one to behaviors that appear to literally stop at nothing in order to achieve one's misdirected goals. Their actions may well put the individual in a position that is irredeemable from the viewpoint of we fellow human beings. But we have an advantage over those in this irredeemable category. We can inspect the results of their behavior that have led them to sacrifice all for their addictions. We can judge whether the means they chose succeeded in achieving their goals. But we do not need to do this. We already have. We know that the searcher after authority is on a quest that is doomed to failure. But all human beings are searchers. There is no other choice. Failure is not a conclusion. Failure is a preamble to the next search, an interlude that eliminates another possibility. One more possibility resulting in failure means one less possibility left to test, and the search continues. It goes on until no untested possibilities remain. Eventually, one musters the courage to reject the possibility of finding the outward authority and sets out to inwardly become the authority, one's own personal authority, and authority for no one except oneself. Then the search after what is begins. The search after the outward authority is discarded. But what about one's attitude toward the majority of human beings who still occupy this discarded path that searches after the outside physical authority? The first emotion that surfaces is always fear. We fear those who are different because they represent the unknown. But in this instance, the searcher after authority is a thoroughly known commodity. In fact, there is probably nothing that the searcher after what is knows more completely than the searcher after authority. The searcher after what is has suffered all of the miseries of the searcher after authority. The searcher after what is has painstakingly investigated all of the possibilities for completing the search after authority and discovered all to be wanting. The searcher after what is an expert on being a search after authority. Every human being who is a searcher after what is was first a searcher after authority. Fear of the unknown regarding searchers after authority? Never. All the bluster and trickery is thoroughly understood and carries no fear, because its ultimate inadequacy has been personally verified in one's own life experiences. The emotional response of the searcher after what is to the searcher after authority is not fear. What about admiration? A silly question. Maybe not. Do we forget so soon what a struggle it is to personally explore every possible search after authority and to have every one of them come up lacking? Is it not depressing? Isn't continuing the search under such bleak conditions deserving of some admiration? Yes, but admiration in behalf of a lost cause is misleading. What about another emotion related to admiration, but more to the point? What about respect? Can't we respect the searcher after authority, whether we share the search after authority or not? We are presently either sharing this search after authority, or we have recently done so. Certainly none of us are far enough removed from the search after authority to experience any negative emotional response. A negative emotional response to the search after authority, but not to the searcher, who will eventually recognize the uselessness of the search after the outward authority and discard it in favor of a genuine search after what is. Any negative response is properly restricted to the misguided search, but not to the misguided searcher. Or is the proper response not a negative one, but just to ignore the misguided searcher after authority? To a certain extent, the searcher after what is does ignore the searcher after authority, simply by focusing all effort on the search after what is. If all attention is directed to the search after what is, by default, there is no time left to give attention to the searcher after authority. Although the de facto response of the searcher after what is may be to ignore the searcher after authority, that is not the emotional response. The emotional response of the searcher after what is to the searcher after authority must be one of respect. No matter how misguided the searcher after authority is, and no matter how mired in addiction one becomes, there is no escaping that there is more that unites the searcher after authority with the searcher after what is than there is that separates them. In the first place, no human being is totally a searcher after what is, or a searcher after authority. The best of us has vestiges of the search after authority mentally. We are still human beings. The worst of us has glimpses of the search after what is mentally. Human beings are no longer directed by animal instinct. If our attention is primarily consumed by searching after what is, It can only engender respect for other searchers, whether those searchers are searchers after what is or searchers after authority. Respect for other searchers after what is obvious, but respect for the searcher after authority is in need of justification. Why respect a loser, one who tries to thwart one at every opportunity, one who is a hopeless addict and total troublemaker? First, we know the searcher after authority is not a total troublemaker, because no human being is a total anything. Second, we know the searcher after authority is not a loser. We know that searching after authority is a loser. Further, we know that the searcher after authority, after exploring all possibilities, will have no other choice but to reject the search after authority and join in the honest search after what is. And finally, we know that the searcher after authority is not a hopeless addict, but a searching addict who will eventually exhaust all possibilities and abandon the search after authority and join in the search after what is. We can muster no respect for the search after authority, but we must respect the searcher. A boundary exists between the search after authority and the searcher after authority. Boundaries are important. Consciology training includes detailed steps for learning exactly how to delineate who is oneself and whom are others. This includes what one knows and what is owned. This includes what one owns and what is owned by others. These boundaries are primary to understanding oneself and one's relationship with others. It is necessary to understand these boundaries in order to progress past the search after authority stage. Until one develops a strong individual identity, one's reality is centered outside of oneself. Only after understanding that reality is centered within oneself can one deal with the physical world as a virtual reality. Then one is able to recognize that the physical world acts as a virtual reality adventure equally for every human being, whether each human being yet recognizes their role or is yet able to expand one's awareness of consciousness to this degree. But after having reached this degree of consciousness, the old boundaries seem no longer to matter. But that is misleading. The boundaries matter just as much as ever. What has changed is the degree of consciousness of human beings. When human beings reach this degree of consciousness, the old boundaries are no longer borders, because the other human beings, having reached this same degree of consciousness, innately respect that these boundaries are inalienable. There being complete agreement on this point, these human beings can build on their commonality instead of defending against their differences. A unity among all human beings can be realized that will greatly contribute to the physical and mental well-being of all. But please do not interpret this as utopian. This occurs one individual at a time, and is one only after each individual masters the education necessary to expand one's own awareness of consciousness. It is not a revolution in the physical world. It is a revolution in the mental realm. Each evolution of species in the physical world is caused by an increased awareness of consciousness of one of that species in the mental world. Each is recognized as describing the same events from different points of view. From the view of Consciology, the significance of the evolution of species is that it represents the realization of consciousness. Further, the significance of the evolution of species is that from diversity comes unity. The more the number of species are multiplied, the more that evolution illuminates this gigantic display of the might of consciousness and its seminal unity. Conscious energy is not perceived directly by the human senses. This is because conscious energy is complete, perfect, and unlimited, while human beings are incomplete, imperfect, and limited. Like conscious energy, electrical energy is not directly perceived by the human senses. Its power only becomes evident when a ground completes the electrical circuit. Without the world as the ground to complete the consciousness circuit, human reason could not even indirectly connect with absolutes. The world, as a reflection of consciousness, provides the means whereby human reason can grasp an indirect understanding of consciousness. Since the world is a reflection of consciousness, it should not be surprising that reason's revelations might appear to be backward, as if seen in a mirror. This further substantiates that the world that appears to be outside ourselves is merely the reflection of the consciousness that resides within each individual. Through self-consciousness, animal behavior is transformed to human behavior when the human chooses individual responsibility over animal instinct. One affirms, I am. Without self-consciousness, one is unaware of one's individual existence apart from others. Self-consciousness separates human beings when reason separates thoughts according to those thoughts that are one's own and those thoughts that are the thoughts of others, what is oneself and what is others, what is one's own and what is owned by others. This inspires the pride of ownership and self-esteem. If one is able to bring enough honesty and courage to this process, one affirms one's future development stems solely from one's own understanding. This affirms reason as the means to achieve one's future development, and that such development will come from within oneself and not from others. This is a lonely proposition. If one weakens, one is likely to join the search after authority, where one attempts to shift one's individual responsibility to some mystical authority figure. Eventually, circumstances brought on by this attitude lead one to affirm that the search after authority is doomed to failure. Whereupon one assumes more and more of one's own individual responsibility. This is the culmination of an extended period of creating boundaries that separate one's individual self from others. Throughout the search after authority, reason seems to affirm that these boundaries cannot be maintained without the support of others. But in the end, these boundaries that one has created to separate one from others are transformed from boundaries to borders. These boundaries have in the past enabled one to identify the self and separate self from others. Now these boundaries dissolve into borders that are shared by other individuals who have dedicated themselves to a genuine search after what is. The boundaries initially appeared to be fortresses that held out the enemy. Now these boundaries are simply lines in the sand that enfold those who voluntarily share a unity of purpose that results from the discovery of the bankruptcy of the search after authority. Self-consciousness has enabled the individual to affirm what is within oneself, thereby affirming what is in each human being. The self-consciousness that engendered a pride that separated individuals has been transmuted into individual responsibility that unites human beings. By applying reason to one's emotions, desires, and passions become tempered. As temperance is applied in more and more areas of one's life, emotions that engendered a fear of others are replaced by a process whereby one identifies with those individuals who share one's allegiance to temperance in all things. But let us not try to jump forward in time, and let us not forget our space-time condition. Human beings are still human beings. Human beings are still limited, incomplete, and imperfect. That has not changed. What is changing is that individual human beings are learning that by improving their mastery over themselves and by becoming self-governing, that the well-being of all improves. By expanding one's awareness of consciousness, one is able to increase one's power to create conditions favorable not only to oneself, but to all of humanity. Human beings are searchers. When human beings are successful in one search, a new search is revealed. Each search is more fulfilling than the one just mastered. Each is a landmark along one's path of development. The search goes on. The rewards multiply. The contentment grows. Will it ever end? Who would ask? What could rival the search?